My guest today is a legend in the U.S. tactical community, Chief Phil Hansen. Phil recently retired after serving as the Chief of Police for the Santa Maria, California Police Department. But prior to Santa Maria, Phil retired as a captain from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, where he served for 36 years. During his tenure at LASD, he spent more than 24 years in full-time tactical and emergency management positions, including nearly 20 years at the Elite Special Enforcement Bureau, or SEB. Phil has served as a board member of the National Tactical Officers Association since 1991, including serving as the chairman of the board. He is a member of the executive committee for the California POST SWAT guidelines and has served as a board of inquiry member for LAPD and Oakland PD following high-profile shootings. My name is John Becker, host of the Debrief podcast and the founder of Aardvark Tactical. This is a new short-form podcast series from the Debrief. In each episode, we will discuss a single aspect of leadership in depth with subject matter experts who operate in high-stress environments inside and outside of the tactical community. The goal of this series is to give you direct access to the men and women whose leadership skills have been tested in the world's most dangerous situations and to provide you with specific, actionable information that you can use to hone your leadership skills. This is Battle-Proven Leadership. Phil, I really appreciate you being here, and I'm excited to talk to you today.
Well, thank you, John. It's a real honor to be here. I've enjoyed your podcast, and I absolutely love the people who have been interviewed by you before, so I feel very honored to be a part of this.
Thank you. What I would love to do is, there are a number of Phil Hansen sayings that kind of sit in my lexicon of leadership guidance, but I think one of them is probably a good way for us to start this, which is that successful leadership begins with a focus on the well-being of those you lead. Talk to me about that.
Sure. Leadership begins with a focus on the well-being of those you lead. Now, I can see people hearing that and saying, well, no kidding. That just makes common sense. But I usually pose a question when I'm talking to a class about that. That being said, that might seem like a no-brainer, but how many of you have worked for somebody, a leader, who didn't have the focus on you and your peers, that their focus was on their own career, their focus was on their superior officers and things because they were concerned about promotion or making them happy. And to me, good baseline leadership begins with caring for your personnel and having that focus on them. Because, John, we have tremendous, as a leader, we have tremendous responsibility to those people that we lead, and we have to recognize that. In terms of law enforcement, we talk about critical incidents and things, and so you get caught up in life and death. But the 90% of your, or more actually, of your leadership influence takes place on a daily basis. How you treat your people, the mentoring and that you give them, the teaching, being helpful, being concerned about how things are going for them at work and in their lives. And you have the power as a leader to make them happy at work or make them miserable. So it's one of those things, it's such a broad spectrum how much responsibility a leader has, and it has to start with a focus on your folks, not on yourself or some other thing.
Yeah, one of my all-time favorite sayings is that the difference between a leader and a manager is that a manager does what's right for their career and a leader does what's right for their people.
Yeah, that's one of them, certainly. And that's probably the biggest. It's a good, concise way to put it. And then while we're on the topic, John, leadership involves solving problems for your folks. You have a problem as a leader if you don't want your personnel to come to you with their problems. And I always kind of grimace when I hear a leader talk about, oh, they're always bringing me problems or whatever. Well, that's your job. There's a great saying, Colin Powell had a great saying in his leadership presentations, that the day a soldier stops bringing you their problems is the day you failed to lead. They've either decided that you don't care or that you're unable to help them. Either case is a case of failed leadership.
I think one of the challenges as a leader is that the higher up in the food chain you move,
mm-hmm.
the I always say, like, there's cookies and turds. And if your people find cookies, they eat them. And if they find turds, they put them on your desk. And the farther up the chain you get, the more filtered the turds become.
Yes.
And so it becomes easy as a leader to become irritated by negativity, because as a leader, most of what you're dealing with is negative.
Sure. You deal with the problems.
How do you manage that? Like, how do you personally deal with the fact that what you're going to constantly be presented are challenges and are problems, and not allow yourself to get to a point where it's like, oh God, I don't want to hear another one?
You know, that's a great question, John. And I'll tell you how I went about working that. And it gets back to the focus on the people that you lead. For instance, as a chief of police, all you get is problems. I saw a little funny meme. It said, being a chief of police is a lot like riding a bicycle, except the bicycle's on fire and you're on fire and everything around you is on fire.
Yeah.
You know, so you get problems all day that you have to deal with. And one of the most refreshing things for me to do, and important things for me to do, was to go to briefings and just see my people and talk to them a little bit. And maybe follow a couple of them out to the car as they were going out to load up and have a little conversation about how life is going for them or whatever. But that recentered me. It reminds you, because these are wonderful people that are working for you, and they're happy to see you. They're happy that their leaders take time to come in and see what they're about and have eyeball-to-eyeball contact with them. And I would walk out of briefing feeling so much better about why I was doing what I was doing and why it's important that I do what I do. And it gave me energy to go back and attack those problems that I had to deal with.
I think it's easy as a leader to become isolated.
Sure.
And to find yourself in your office constantly working with things. And I agree with you. I spend a lot of my time walking through our building and having conversations with guys working in the warehouse and people working in manufacturing. And, you know, I find it not only brings me ground truth, but it also grounds me.
Absolutely. It reminds you of what these people are doing for you out there, and how important it is that you support them in their tasks. And I'll tell you an interesting story on LA Sheriff. The deputies union, if you will, ALADS, Association for Los Angeles Deputy Sheriffs, they put out a magazine on a regular basis, or a paper, and once a year they would rate the captains on the department. The deputies would rate the captains.
Ooh.
And there were some horrific things, and there were some funny things, and we always look forward to reading those things when they came out. And you look to see who got high ratings and who got low ratings. And some of the things you could just discount. I mean, they were funny, but they'd write things like, I wouldn't follow him out of a burning building, and this kind of thing. But I'll tell you what I always noticed that was consistent on the captains that got the poor ratings. You would see comments like, I haven't seen this captain at a graveyard shift briefing in over 2 years. I haven't seen this captain, that sort of a thing. And that resonated with me as a young man. And I said, if I ever get to that position, I have to make sure that I go see all my people on a regular basis, all my shifts. And I kept a calendar of it, John, for instance, as a commander or as a chief of police. I kept a calendar of it so that I made sure I went on a regular basis to all the different shift briefings and said hi to the folks. And I also, this is going to sound funny, but I kept a lineup sheet, if you will, in my desk that had everybody's picture on it and their name. And I would look to see who was working that night and make sure I knew that I could call every one of my personnel by name. And it's funny, I over time you get to know them all by name, but I had a couple hundred people in Santa Maria, for instance, and they're constantly hiring and people leaving, so there's new people. But I've had officers come up to me and say, "Sir, I couldn't believe you always knew my first name when you saw me." That takes a little work maybe, but it means something to your folks. Anytime that you can spend time with them, and it energized me to see them excited about going out and doing this work that we've asked them to do. And I think it energized them a little bit to see that their commander or chief or whoever cared enough to come in and talk to them and call them by name and ask them how things were going. And so that's really, to get back to your original question, that's how I dealt a lot of times with that feeling beat up a little bit by the occasional complaints or force issues or whatever that came up that were problematic.
Yeah, I get it. That's fantastic. Let's talk about empowerment.
Sure.
So I think one of the things that a lot of leaders struggle with is delegation of authority and the line between empowering the people who work for you and the end of your authority.
Mm-hmm.
How do you view that?
Well, I'm a huge proponent of empowering people to do their jobs. I think you should push decision-making down to the lowest levels that you can. Doesn't mean you're not supervising those people while they're doing that, but give them the opportunity to make decisions, make mistakes, learn from their experience. And you can't be all places at all times. And that's the thing, is you're not going to be there sometimes. And if they've had no experience doing that and they're not learning anything, they're going to be in trouble if they don't have. You can create a culture where people expect to be told what to do all the time, or you can create a culture where they know they've got the authority to do it themselves and make it happen. I'll tell you, I had an interesting experience. This was actually on another slide. Empowering is not the same as empowering your personnel is not the same as abdicating your authority. And we had, as an example, we had a shooting one day. I was the SWAT commander at SEB, and one night we had a hostage situation, and a man had shot his estranged wife and was holding their 2-year-old hostage, and was using the child actually as a shield. And he'd been heavily involved in drinking and doing drugs and stuff, and over a period of time. And he actually got on the phone at one point and told us to tell his sister goodbye. Next time you see me, I'll be in a coffin. Well, I put this information out over the air to the team, and I made it very clear. Team commander to team, this is the situation. This is a hostage situation as I see it, based on the following things. And I enumerated those issues that led me to believe we had a righteous hostage situation, and that child was in continuing in imminent danger. I looked over at the team or the incident commander who was with me, and I said, we will probably hear a shot before too long if they get a shot on this guy. Now, what did I do? I didn't come on the radio and say, shoot this guy, or long rifle 2, if you get a shot at this guy, take it. But I gave them the facts that they needed to make a decision based on our TTPs, our tactics, techniques, and procedures, and a common knowledge of tactics, techniques, procedures, of law, and now of the situation that we're dealing with. And I knew that based on what our TTPs were and what I had just told them, that there would probably be a decision to take a shot on this guy. And they did, and we did a quick explosive breach and had that child back being checked out, who was fine, thank goodness, back at the CP in a matter of moments. I felt wonderful about it. I thought I was so proud of my team members. I thought we did a good job. I thought we did everything by the numbers, and we did everything we could to resolve the situation peacefully for everybody. But when that didn't seem like it was going to be it seemed like there was a high propensity for violence on that child, we went ahead and did what we had to do to save that child's life. Interesting about that, I found myself in the administrative offices of the Sheriff's Department asking me who gave the authority to take that shot, this sort of thing. It's funny, these police administrators who are used to, LASD has many officer-involved shootings every year, as you know, and they're used to them, but they're used to reactive shootings. He pointed a gun at me, so I shot him, or he had a shiny object in his hand, he pointed at me, or he shot at me, so I shot him. That's what they're used to. They're not used to a deliberate decision to take a shot by a deputy based on a belief that there's some ongoing threat. And it was an interesting. I found myself giving a class to some senior executives on the fact that empowerment is not the same as abdicating my authority. I said, look, we operate off a certain set of TTPs. We know what the law is. We know what our policy is on force. And I gave them the situation, and I empowered them to take the actions that they took. I didn't have to tell them this is for you to do at this point, if that makes sense to you.
That makes perfect sense. I think it's one of the challenges as a leader is providing your people, empowering your people to make decisions, and then giving them kind of an envelope that they can operate into.
Yes.
And I think one of the mistakes that we make as leaders frequently is we either overcomplicate that, right? We try to give them a 15-page list of here are the circumstances, or we give two, just go do your job.
Yeah.
And I tell the story of with my kids, I tried to teach them underlying principles.
Absolutely.
So it's not like don't take the cookie, it doesn't belong to you. It's don't take things that don't belong.
Right.
Right. This is kind of the ethos of what I think and how I feel. And I think as leaders, we're too inclined to give either no instruction or too much instruction. And I'd like to kind of pick up both sides of that. The no instruction, I think we are sometimes inclined to try to pass a broad policy and think that is somehow going to regulate behavior.
Yes. Well, that's a very common problem, and I think it's particularly common the larger the agency that you have. If you have an agency along the lines of an LAPD or an LA Sheriff, LA Sheriff's Department has 18,000 employees. So if you want to change behavior, what they tend to do is put it on a policy and just brief it. And that's cheap. That's the cheap way to go. If you really want to, I call that trying to legislate behavior. We wrote a policy, so do it this way now. If you really want to change how things are done, particularly at 3 a.m. at some station, out in South Central Los Angeles or something like that, when nobody's looking, if you want to change how it's done, write the policy and then go talk to the officers about it. If possible, even get them involved in creating the policy, but go out and explain it to them. Leaders have to go. This is about leadership, this discussion we're having. Leaders, you can't lead by sitting at a computer and cranking out policy. That's not leadership. Leadership is going to briefing and saying, here's what we're going to do, and this is why, and explaining it to them and giving them an opportunity to ask questions about it or even argue with it. And honestly, as a chief, when I would write a substantial new policy, I'd go to briefings and I'd talk about it and explain it. And I'd give them a shot at me. I'd say, does anybody want to try an opposing viewpoint on me here and tell me why? And if they had a convincing argument, I might go back and alter that policy a little bit or change it. But if you can get the rank and file, even if they don't like it, even if officers or deputies or whoever in an industry, any industry you pick, they might not like this change, but if they can understand the change and the reasons behind it, they'll go along with it. But if it's just something that comes down from the ivory tower and it makes no sense to them and they don't see the underlying reasons for it, then you'll have that tendency to have that typical, this is BS. Those people haven't done this job for 20 years and they'll fight it, and you get some senior people fighting it that are peer leaders and not necessarily good peer leaders. You're never going to get that thing off the ground. And I've seen that happen many, many times.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I try to do in leading is I socialize my ideas. And I usually socialize them before they become ideas. So I'll sit down with people and go, what do you think about this? Would this work? Would this not work? Let them start talking about it. Let them come back and say, no, I think we should do it this way. Right. So then when you make a policy, you have an understanding from the troops why that policy exists. Because the why here in leading is usually more important than the what.
Sure. Absolutely.
Right. If they understand why are we doing it this way?
Yep.
That gives them the understanding. And it, going back to what we started with, leading for your people, like if you understand that, if I explain to you the why, if I say, hey, Phil, we're changing this, we're going to do it this way, and here's why. Assuming that what I'm doing is intended to protect you,
Mm-hmm.
you understand the emotional resonance of that.
Right.
Right. If I say, hey, we're not going to do dynamic entry on narcotics search warrants, we're going to contain and call out, which is not a popular topic
Right.
for some SWAT teams. The reason we're doing that is I'm not willing to trade you and your life to build a dope case.
Absolutely. And there's so many ways, so many things I'd love to talk about on this subject, but it all revolves, John, around communications, and communications involves listening on the part of the leader too. That's one of the greatest skills a leader must have. There's something I call a listening paradox. Especially with new leaders, the farther up the chain they go, the more they see themselves as the leader. Therefore, I need to broadcast instructions to everybody, tell them what I want of them, tell them my intent, tell them, and tell them how to do it, this sort of thing. And they picture themselves, young leaders picture themselves as senders primarily of information. And what you really need to do is just the opposite. You need to be a receiver of information. You need to hear from your troops. What are the problems we're having? Why are we having problems implementing this? Why, there's so much you can learn from the people that are working with you or for you. And you have to have that open ear, and listening is the way we show respect for other people too. And that develops relationships, and it's the beginning of trust. And trust is the cornerstone to these relationships. And that's why some people follow a leader and others don't. If you're that leader that sits behind his computer all day cranking out policy, that's a far cry from the one that comes and talks to you. And over time, you've developed a level of trust, and you say, that person listens to me, when I have something to say. That means a lot to subordinates to think that they have a voice on things.
I think it's challenging because as a young leader, I think we always feel a little bit like a counterfeit,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
We get promoted in a company and see ourselves as now, okay, I'm now responsible for leading people, but I don't really know that much what I'm doing, and I don't totally have the answers. And so I think it is difficult to go to people and say, help me understand what I should do. You want to look like you know what you're doing.
Absolutely. Well, exactly. It's a defensive mechanism. So you want to look like you know what you're doing. So you start barking orders or telling people how to do things. And there are times for that. There are times to take charge and say, look, this is the way we're doing it, and we're going in this direction. Once you've made that decision. But I mentioned something a little earlier in the conversation that the vast majority of your leadership opportunities occur on a day-to-day basis in individual interactions and things like that with people. And that's a chance to listen to what they have to say, to mentor them. And I mean, really listen to what they have to say. I get wonderful ideas from other people. I don't always have all the answers. Heck, when I went up to Santa Maria, I had 3 very bright commanders who were tenured. They all had about 20 years on. They were all hardworking, ethical, bright folks, but they were different as night and day, all 3 of them. And I really worked towards an environment where they all felt comfortable saying whatever they had to say or giving their opinion, even if they thought it might differ from their peers. And there's another little clue, tip. If you're the leader in a group, save your opinion till the end. Because if you give your opinion at the beginning of the discussion, you're going to have some people jump on your bandwagon because they think you've already made up your mind anyway, or to ingratiate themselves with you or whatever. and others will be reluctant to have an alternative opinion. And I wanted to hear what they had to say, because these are all bright, engaged, experienced people. And I might still go with my original thought, but it gave me something to bounce off of, these other ideas and whatnot, and maybe modify my plan a little bit, or maybe change it. So listening is a absolute critical skill for a leader. And like I said, it's not just listening because maybe you'll change this plan or that plan. It's also listening because that's how you develop those relationships with people, and at large, at a briefing or whatever with the troops. Listening is that way that you show respect to them. You don't just come in and bark information at them or directives to them. You listen to what they have to say, and you'll earn, that shows respect for them, and they'll give you that respect in return.
I think one of the challenging things, it's leadership is constantly a dichotomy, because my goal is always, I always say, like, my job as a leader is to get to the right answer. It's not to have the right answer. It's to get there.
Right.
I don't have to be the guy that makes the right decision. Somebody else can make the right call. My job is to make sure that as an organization, we get there. But, we kind of talked about the caring about your people side of it. But the counter to that is the need to discipline people and the need to enforce your own policies.
Right.
What's your view on discipline in general?
Well, my view on discipline in general is that you have to think about what it is you're trying to achieve. And what I am trying to achieve is change of behavior. So if I discipline somebody, it's to change their behavior, not to spank them, not to make them hurt or cause them financial pain or anything else. And because of that philosophy that I have, if I can avoid discipline in that sense, I will. I'll make things a training opportunity if I can. That all revolves around what I thought that employee's mindset was to begin with. In other words, if they were trying to do the right thing, but they did it wrong and they made a mistake, I'm going to try to fix that by training. I'm not going to give them 3 days on the bricks or something like that. If it was a malicious thing, if I thought they knew better and they were purposely doing the wrong thing or trying to hurt somebody, or, that's a different story. And then we'll discipline, But the idea is it's not to hurt somebody. That's not what discipline's for. Discipline is to change their behavior. And so I'm looking at the most minimally evasive way of changing that behavior. If I can do it by training, if I can do it by having a conversation. One of the most, one of the things we did up in Santa Maria, we adopted it was kind of like the Wild West when I got up there, and we adopted more of a Southern California type of a pursuit policy. LAPD and LA Sheriff, we have very restrictive pursuit policies because of the danger it poses to uninvolved motorists out there on the street and to the officers or deputies themselves. And so it was a relatively common thing for a while to have violations of policy to some degree or another with pursuits when I got up to Santa Maria, because we put this restrictive policy on them. They want to go out and chase bad guys, When the rabbit runs, the doggone dog is going to chase it, and I want that. And that's the thing that's so hard as an administrator, is I want them to go out and be aggressive police officers and yet remain within those policy structures that we have as best they can. But, we would occasionally have a pursuit. If it was a third or fourth time violator of the same policy, okay, now I'm looking at discipline. If it's the first or second time, I'll tell you what I did that was probably the most effective thing I did was I had them I made my secretary make an appointment with them, and I had them in my office, and we talked about it, and I explained to them once again why this is a concern of mine, because I don't want to go to your funeral. I've been to too many of these, or I don't want to see you living with the fact that you chased some minor violator into a family of 4 and a couple kids got killed or something like that, And you try to get through to them on an intellectual and emotional basis to where they see, okay, this is not about, because an officer or a deputy, their first thought is going to be, oh, this is all about liability. They tell us to catch crooks, and now they're worried about covering their ass, that kind of thing. And is there a concern about liability? Well, sure. But my biggest concern is the safety of that officer and the safety of those uninvolved people out there that are just driving down the street, coming home from school or church or whatever they were at. And, we've seen we learned it the hard way over many years in Los Angeles, how many bad wrecks we had chasing people. And it's got to be worthwhile. There's got to be some risk-benefit analysis that's taken place on pursuits and things. And so you try to teach. I saw it as a teaching moment. Like I said, fourth violation or third or fourth, okay, it's time to give them a couple of days or whatever to show them we're serious about this. But I found it was very effective to sit down and have a talk with them, and tell them why. When the chief of police calls you into his office and wants to have a talk with you, and you sit there and you have a heart-to-heart with them like that, they're usually going to walk out. They usually walk out saying, sir, it'll never happen again, I promise. And it didn't happen again usually.
Yeah, I think again, it goes back to the why. It goes back to them understanding what your views are, and also the root of your views. Why do we have this policy?
Right.
And to come full circle, it goes back to caring about your people.
Absolutely.
Right?
And if I may interrupt, John, I probably sound, to people that have been listening up to this point, I probably sound like a choir boy. I'm up here, looking out for your, good leadership revolves around your people and taking care of your people and being nice to your people and having that conversation and listening to them. So I probably sound like this guy who's giving away the candy store and everything all the time. It also involves that responsibility that I talked about before, that recognizing your responsibility to your folks also means imposing things they don't want at times and being hard line about it. Cops in particular, but I think it's people in general. Nobody likes change. There's the old joke, they don't like things they don't like things the way they are today, and they don't like change. You know? So just to give you a couple of examples, I started, as you know, in the 1970s in this business. We were all told by our peers and the people that didn't want to change, we're not wearing these doggone seatbelts. Seatbelts. I saw deputies cut those things out of cars back in the days, the seatbelts, and we were losing people right and left. We were losing as many people to car crashes as we were to gunfights, but they felt that these doggone seatbelts were going to keep them locked into the car when they were taken under fire and this kind of thing. Well, you just had to be smart about when you unbuckled the doggone thing, but as simple as seatbelts and even vests,
Oh yeah,
ballistic
I remember that.
vests. People used to fight wearing ballistic vests.
Yeah.
It's too hot out. This is crazy. So seat belts and vests in the 70s. I remember in the 80s. When I started at SCB, as a SWAT deputy, we had we didn't have helmets back in those days. We wore ball caps. You see the old SWAT photos, and everybody's wearing ball caps. We finally got helmets, and it was funny. I remember we had 6 teams with roughly 8 on a team back then, and they gave us each team, they gave us 5 helmets. And I'm the sergeant, and I thought, so do the smart guys get these helmets? Or, how do I decide who to give these helmets to?
The smart ones, the dumb ones, the fast ones, the slow ones.
Exactly. So, honestly, John, in this day and age, you'd never see a SWAT officer without his or her helmet on. But back then, guys didn't want to wear the helmets.
Yeah.
I can't hear as well. I can't see as well, And really, I think it just messed up their hair, and they didn't like that, to tell you the truth. But I had to say, okay, here's the deal. The entry team's going to wear the helmets. The entry element, if you will, going to get the 5 helmets we have, if that's what we're sending in. If you don't wear a helmet, if you refuse to wear a helmet, you can be on containment. And, you push it. Then that was when I was a sergeant at SCB, a team leader. And then as a lieutenant, we got shoulder protection on our vests. We got our first shoulder protection on vests. Guys didn't want to wear that. And I had to do the same thing. I made a a deputy who I absolutely loved, knew him for many years, and made him be my radio man one night instead of going with the team because he didn't have his shoulder protection on. I said, "Hey, you want to go make entry? You want to do whatever? You gotta wear this stuff." So, and to me, the biggest thing these days, honestly, is this aversion to looking at different alternative methods of warrant service and things like that. Not wanting to consider slowing down, do a contain and call out, or a limited penetration, or breach and hold, or surveil the thing and follow the guy away and take him down somewhere. But this mantra of speed, surprise, and overwhelming force is it gets people killed all the time. And supervisors, leaders, team commanders, and team leaders have to man up, non-gender specific man up, and impose this change and get used to doing some things some different ways, because it's still getting people killed and resulting in bad shootings.
Yeah, so I think it's to kind of wrap up, it's caring about your people, which sometimes means putting your arm around them, sometimes means helping them change their behavior, and sometimes means saving them from themselves.
Absolutely. It's parenthood to a degree, or a good parenthood. You have to care about them. And that to me that's kind of the bottom line. There's so many things that we can talk about in terms of individual characteristics or tools in your toolbox as a leader, and things that you need to be. You need to be honest, with your folks. You need to listen to them. You need to display some level of humility. I mean, there's so many things we can talk about, but the bottom line, it all revolves around caring for your folks and accepting that responsibility that you have to them and to their families, and putting that ahead of your own maybe career aspirations or whatever your concerns are, and that sort of thing.
Phil, that's a fantastic place to stop. Thank you
Great.
so much.
You're very welcome, John. Thank you.